When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, Beryl. User, 0C0ERS11. Posted, March 8, 1998.
Despite the sun blazing in a cloudless blue sky, the day we drove into Morrow Valley was cool, bordering on cold. Mom and Dad were up front while I shared the back seat with a cooler full of road trip snacks from home, sandwiches, apple slices, and chopped carrots we all pretended we were going to eat instead of buying gas station junk. Our camping gear packed out whatever space was left in the yacht-sized Pontiac Catalina we'd inherited from my Grandpa Ray, including its oversized trunk. Along with the car, Grandpa had left behind his collection of map books, several of which littered the floor around my feet. On command, I was expected to produce the appropriate volume for our general geographical location and hand it to my mom, who would then tell Dad where to turn, often right after the exit had passed. For most of the day, we'd been passing through farmland, Dad easing off the gas to accommodate huge dump trucks full of freshly harvested sweet onions. Their odor was so strong it filled our nostrils for miles after the trucks were gone, and years later, no matter where I am, I still identify that smell with that day. The point of the trip was a visit to my Aunt Gloria, who'd just gotten remarried to a man named Glenn, with whom she'd moved back to his small mountain town to take over his family's restaurant business. Out of respect for their privacy, some of the details of this story have to be intentionally vague, but I have a feeling you keeners out there will be able to make the necessary leaps. Some of the maps Grandpa Ray had left behind were even older than his car. Mostly, this was a problem in big cities where infrastructure was rapidly evolving. Out in the wildlands, you could count on very little changing, and that's how, as the plains gave way to mountains and pine forests, we ended up taking a left at Harper Trunk Road toward what the map said was Morrow Valley and a small town named Beryl. Our other option, a right, would have also have taken us closer to our destination, albeit through a more circuitous route that wound its way through a series of foothills before gradually ascending toward our destination. Cars, like our Catalina, didn't have air conditioning. If you wanted it cooler, you rolled down a window and hoped for a breeze. We'd been lucky all day, barely breaking a sweat, but as the two-lane highway began to angle downward, the wind, which had been our constant companion, gradually fell away. A clammy humidity took its place, causing dark half-moon sweat stains to bloom in the armpits of my green floral blouse. Before too long, the air got so thick we could barely smell the pine trees crowding the road. Noises, too, seemed to struggle in the dampness. Our engine's roar was muffled, seeming to come from much further away. Birdsong had stopped entirely. As bad as it had been on the way down, the valley floor was so much worse. Nailed to one of the pines was a black and white hand-painted sign which read simply, "Welcome to Beryl." Beads of condensation ran down it, streaking its letters. Mom fanned herself, and then me, with one of the old map books, and all it had accomplished was moving the hot air from one place to another. Not long after the welcome sign, the forest pulled back to reveal fields of grass, at the center of which was a whitewashed bandstand. What looked to be an American flag hung limply from the pole atop its red-domed roof. After the bandstand, Dad slowed the Catalina down as a small main street lined with low buildings was rapidly approaching. From my vantage point in the back seat, I could see pools of clear water collected in the gutter, as if we'd arrived shortly after a downpour had clogged up all their drainage. The car was moving at a crawl now, giving us enough time to take in the fogged-up storefronts, behind which the shadows of the town's inhabitants could be seen moving, if not the inhabitants themselves. Dad made a weak joke about how Beryl's richest man had to be whoever installed everyone's air conditioning, so Mom and I gave him a little chuckle, but none of us really felt like laughing. The humidity was practically a physical force, making it harder and harder simply to draw oxygen out of the air. Mom started shifting in her seat, urging Dad to go a little faster. He nodded his head as though he agreed we should pick up the pace, yet we kept crawling along the sodden main street, our tires now whooshing through ever-deepening puddles. We were on the far side of town before we actually saw someone in full daylight, a middle-aged man of medium height wearing a blue chambray work shirt and worn dungarees, leaning on a red gas pump outside a service station. The name, Huttner Brothers Service, was stenciled in gold on its white brick walls. Over Mom's protest, Dad came to a stop in front of the man, who waved a greeting. His face was weathered, deep lines carved into a broad forehead, with a couple days' worth of salt and pepper stubble dusted across his cheeks. I no longer remember exactly what Dad asked, but it had to have been something innocuous, maybe a comment about the heat. In fact, that probably was it. It's gone from my memory because when the old man opened his mouth to respond, a gout of green water spouted out several feet. Spray from the stream speckled his work shirt, and yet not once did his blue eyes register a single note of surprise, even when tiny rivulets of the same liquid cascaded down his cheeks. Mom shrieked, slapping Dad's arm and screaming at him to drive, and he drove, the Catalina's engine roaring to life as gallons more water poured from the oblivious man's face, joining with the streams running below the sidewalk to form a veritable river. We lurched forward, and the service station fell behind us. That's when I saw it. The rapidly receding gas station wasn't the only thing behind us. Far in the distance, I could just make out the bandstand, and beyond it, a wall of water was rushing forth, knocking over thick pine trees like they were bowling pins. It was my turn to scream, joined shortly thereafter by Mom, who had turned to follow my gaze. The land was rising now, Dad hurriedly cranking the wheel to follow switchbacks which weren't taking us up the valley wall nearly fast enough. The surging waters reduced the bandstand to matchsticks in the blink of an eye. We whipped around another hairpin turn, steadily climbing. When again I could see back toward town, half of it was engulfed, driving broken buildings ahead of it like wrecking balls. It had reached the service station, and even though it was far away, I was certain I saw the man in the work shirt simply stand there as if he didn't see anything at all. In an instant, he was gone, along with the service station and every other part of Beryl, all of which was now rocketing toward the valley's far end. Towards us, Dad swore loudly, jamming the Catalina's gas pedal so hard into the floorboards, I thought his foot might go clear through to the road like Fred Flintstone. Another switchback, then another. The flood was so close we could hear the ground shuddering, and then we were clear, rocketing up the last of the incline until we were again on flat road. Was that enough elevation? Had we made it to safety? I forced myself to look out of the back window and wasn't at all prepared for what I saw. We were well above the high water mark, but it scarcely seemed to matter. Behind us was a placid lake, its dark surface barely stirred by the breeze, which was now cooling the sweat on my face. A blue jay trilled, swooping down from one of the nearby trees to land on a sturdy wooden barricade which hadn't been there a moment before. Behind it, the blacktop was old and crumbling, petering out 30 feet before the waterline. Mom and Dad hadn't seen it yet, so we kept racing ahead, the barricade getting smaller and smaller. As it did, I read the sign mounted on its front. In memory of the town of Beryl, Washington, and the 450 residents lost in the Gallup River dam collapse, June 3rd, 1935.
Subject, the Harbinger. User, 3inOnTL. Posted, June 12, 1995.
Yesterday morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my belly I couldn't explain. It stayed with me as I popped on the coffee maker and waited for toast I didn't particularly want. The kitchen was warmer than it should have been, given the flat gray light coming in through the window. It was humid too, so much so that the ticking of our old clock barely seemed able to make it across the room. The clock was a collectible, or at least that's what Margaret had said when she convinced me to buy it at a yard sale years ago. It was bakelite, white with red numbering and a heavy pendulum swinging quietly back and forth. It hadn't worked when we bought it, a fact I pointed out and Margie summarily ignored. "You can fix it," she said. "You can fix anything." It was true enough as far as it goes. I didn't know from vintage, but I had the tinkerer's knack. Margie knew things. I fixed things. It was a good division of labor. Of course, when she got sick, I couldn't fix that, and when she died, I stopped trying to fix much of anything. The clock keeps going, though, and I have a feeling it'll be going long after I join her in the hereafter. When I say hereafter, you might find yourself thinking, here's a Jesus jumper who can't wait to hop the fence into his holy arms, but that's not it at all. I'm no Christian. The things I've seen in my 74 years have made that all but impossible. But I believe in the hereafter because I've encountered it in the flesh, so to speak. Which brings me to yesterday morning. I had been sitting on the veranda watching clouds knot themselves together above the Chesapeake when my subconscious finally made the connection, and I knew why I felt the way I did. Yesterday was exactly 20 years to the day that I saw what I call the Harbinger, and it was 20 years ago today that a tornado wiped half our hometown off the map. People don't talk much about the 1974 super outbreak anymore, but if you were there, you can never forget it. The period of April 3rd to 4th, 1974 was and remains the largest, most violent tornado outbreak in recorded history, with 148 tornadoes confirmed across 13 states and 1 Canadian province. In all, those tornadoes carved a path of destruction almost 3,000 miles long, taking with them more than 300 lives, including some of our family and friends. The day before the tornadoes began was unremarkable. Ken Biederman, the floor manager at my hardware store, had called in sick, so I worked late to cover his shift, then picked up Margie on my way home. She was a high school art teacher and doing some unpaid overtime as a volunteer to help the drama kids get their new production organized. We had dinner, watched Happy Days and MASH, and were in bed by 9:30. Usually, I'd be the first to fall asleep, but that night, I just couldn't keep my eyes closed. I stayed with Margie until I was sure she was asleep, then softly got up and made my way downstairs to watch Barnaby Jones. I don't know exactly when I fell asleep, but the CBS sign-off woke me up, which meant it had to be 1:30. My neck had cricked at some point, a consequence of napping on the couch, and I was in the middle of trying to work it out when the strangest compulsion came over me. Some internal voice told me to get up and go to the rear living room window, the one that looked out over our backyard. In those days, we lived in Xenia, Ohio, in a house we'd built at the edge of a forest on the town's north side. We didn't have neighbors, so the curtains on that rear window were always left open, giving us an expansive view of our yard, the creek that ran through it, and the forest beyond. It was like being right in the thick of nature without all the mosquitoes, and that suited us fine. That night, however, it didn't suit me at all. As I looked out into the moonlit yard, I felt a chill pass through me. There was no obvious reason for it, but I suddenly found myself wanting to close the curtains and head right upstairs to bed with Margie. Instead, the same unusual inner voice that had compelled me to the window in the first place convinced me to stay right where I was and keep watching. My body tensed. Watching for what? I asked, startling myself by speaking out loud. I chuckled at my own jumpiness, but the humor of the moment passed quickly because shortly after that, I saw a small figure moving just inside the tree line. Too small to be a deer, too big to be a raccoon. My chills got worse as the figure stepped out from behind branches into the moonlight. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, wearing blue jeans and a checked flannel shirt, the sleeves too long for his arms. The first thing that came to mind was concern. After all, what was a little boy doing out here in the middle of the night? He had the most beautiful smile on his face, too, serene and bright, like he was waiting for a school photographer to take his picture. But no matter how benign he looked or how sweet his grin, my body just wouldn't relax. The back window is beneath an overhang, so even on a bright night like that one, with all the interior lights off as they were, I shouldn't have been visible to anyone outside, but that little boy looked right at me and waved. It should have been comforting. It should have been enough to get me to go on the rear porch and call out to him to see if he needed help. This might sound strange, but it was his hands that changed my mind. I couldn't see them. His long flannel sleeves hung past where his hand should have been, and even when he swung his arms up to wave, I saw only flailing fabric. Something about that didn't feel right. Still, I returned the wave. The boy's smile grew then, so wide I thought it might split his face. It spread till the corners of his mouth disappeared, his lips pulling back over jagged triangular teeth in a way that was neither human nor animal, but some terrible third thing. I'd never seen anything like it before, nor have I since, yet it connected to something old in me, an ancient, indescribable fear that froze my heart in my chest and rooted me to the spot. He then began to run full out toward the window, his sleeves fluttering behind him like streamers. I wish I could say I did something, but even Anzio couldn't prepare me for this. I watched, helpless, as the boy approached. A sound began to come from everywhere and nowhere, a freight train's roar filling my head until I thought it was going to burst. My last memory before everything went black was the boy's face, blank now except for two large almond eyes and shark's teeth. I came to on the floor, cradled by Margie. According to her, she had been awoken by my screaming moments before and rushed downstairs to find me passed out by the window. I was groggy, my head throbbing from the fall, and I was incapable of saying much more than the boy, but whoever he was, whatever he was gone. In the morning, the whole event seemed so impossible that I spun Margie a story about a bad dream. She didn't believe me exactly, but she was willing to believe that I'd been overextending myself at work and insisted we both take a sick day. In the end, that's what saved both our lives. It was just before 5 p.m. when the F5 tornado that had been forming near Bellbrook took a turn towards Xenia. It ripped the eastern neighborhoods apart like they were made of paper before grinding its way through downtown, flattening everything in its path, including my hardware store and the high school where Margie worked. The power of the thing was indescribable. 5 different vortices joining together like the fingers on God's hand, wiping away half of our hometown. And while the power of it was indescribable, the sound it made was not. In fact, you might say it sounded like the roar of a freight train. I said earlier that I wasn't a Jesus jumper, and I'm not, but I spent enough time in foxholes with them to know a bit about that book, especially the Old Testament, which the boys at Anzio would read like it was some kind of protective spell. If you know anything about these stories, you know that Old Testament God works in mysterious, cruel ways. His angels are terrifying and incomprehensible, operating according to a logic of mercy understandable only by a mind greater than any on earth. If what I saw that night, 1974, was an angel, then I have to concede there's an existence out there beyond my understanding. And if that's true, then Margie has to be out there too. I don't believe in much anymore, but I believe in that.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.